Old World America? What do you mean, Old World? America is the New World. Civilized America is the result of European exploration. The great thinkers of the 1800s told us that we came from monkeys, that we dwelled in caves for thousands of years, did not read or write for the longest time. They tell us great civilizations rose and fell thousands of years ago. We slipped into a dark age, that we came out of that dark age thanks to enlightened thinkers, and rose to new heights of architecture, science, medicine. They teach us that we've been warring with each other for thousands of years, ever since the dawn of man, that we can't really agree on anything. In this video, I'm going to provide you with an alternative to that history. We're going to be removing the Rockefeller indoctrination and allow our minds to explore other options. But first I'll warn you, if you're not familiar with all of this, if you're a television-watching news believer, this content may put you in a state of fear, shock, or anger. You must know that that is not the intention here, but rather just to share an alternative to who and what we really are. First, a bit about the slideshow you're watching here. This is a collection of highlights from American cities that I have covered here on this channel. 2 or 3 different examples from every city that I have covered. In America specifically. And although this theory is realm-wide, I have chosen to narrow my focus to the United States of America for this video. And what you're witnessing are examples of magnificent architecture. And this really has been the trigger for me to explore the falsification of our historical timeline. And I think it's quite evident visually with the examples that we have left behind, whether they stand or whether they have been demolished. Much of the architecture you're seeing here contradicts the historical narrative we have been taught about America. I believe the anchor to this alternative history lies in the acceptance or understanding that there is a malevolent force and has been for several hundred years working against the betterment of humanity, and they have been in control of our destiny. They have done that through indoctrination, through controlling our financial system, our economic system, our time itself through those means. And they have done all of this through deception. And I think the anchor is the fact that they are hiding a cataclysm or a series of cataclysms that occurred here in the not too distant past. The Royal Society Fellows of the 1800s attempted to stretch out the timeline here of this realm and made us an insignificant speck, I guess, on the timeline of history here. And in so doing, they have managed to obscure a great cataclysm that happened here. And I think either they were involved in inducing the cataclysm, or they took advantage of the destruction that happened here and systematically set about to provide the people with a false history in which they are the victors, the top of the heap of humanity. And it helps to look at the way we view history in our mind's eye and to question and understand where we get that concept of history. What we are taught through the education system, which was heavily funded by these characters, what we are taught is a timeline of history. And really we have nodal points. We're given, for instance, American Revolution. French Revolution, War of 1812, American Civil War. You can go back or you can go forward, but these are all nodal points that we have been given as a reference for history. And of course we have, many will say we have documentation of these events. What I'm questioning here on this channel is the documentation itself, and trying to highlight that much of this has been forged and falsified to portray this false timeline that they want us to embrace as truth. And I think it is an outright lie. I think that's what they represent, is deception. They represent fear, deception, and lies, and all the rest of it. And this is something in this modern era that we find ourselves in that is becoming more and more obvious. So if you hear this video is being made in 2024, if you have not come to the understanding that there are very, very large lies that we are being forced to wrap our heads around, I hope you get there soon, because this is something all of us have to shake off as humanity itself. Maybe you're wondering how could they perform, how could they pull off such a monumental feat. It doesn't take a lot of research to understand who has really been at the controls of this re-education, let's say. We have a 1800s rife with war, pestilence. We have a massive amount of asylums, orphanages. So I think we have a very overt re-education process going on in the 1800s, in a corporal punishment type of manner. As we get into the 1900s, we have several wars that serve to wipe the people, but wipe the memory as well of the past. And then we have the formalization of the education system, where it's less of a physically forcing a past, but really an indoctrination. And you have the technology of the 1900s, the TV, the radio. You have the narrowing of perception into these platforms. Then you have to ask yourself, well, who's in control of these technologies? Focusing back on America, I haven't mentioned this on the channel in the past. I think America itself, with the Declaration of Independence, represents a legal means, I suppose you could say, to break away from their control system. And I think the struggle in American history, although much of it is obscured from us, has to do with the attempt to move away from that control. Things like freedom and liberty are at the forefront of what America stands for. And despite that fact, we get the American Civil War, and then you get the British Crown, I suppose, attempting the City of London, let's say, the financial center of Britain, continuing to take control, or attempting to take control. You have this struggle going on. Eventually you get the Federal Reserve in the early 1900s, and then they take control of America through the financial system. And I think America, the indoctrination system, happened in the 1800s. They used the World Fairs to reset the narrative for the people. And they used America throughout the 1900s to implement this reset in other parts of the realm. If you look into the World's Fairs in the States, early 1900s, late 1800s, you have a narrative of Anglo-European exceptionalism being pushed. You have the native populations being savages, uncivilized savages being pushed. All these narratives are being pushed through the World's Fairs. And I suggest that our perception of all of these different populations is firmly rooted in the World's Fairs. and then the subsequent schooling system that came after that. It was almost like it was a kickoff for the education system. So we have a falsification of history for all peoples here. It doesn't matter what color you are, where you come from, what language you speak. This falsification is very, very deep and firmly rooted in a very evil force. And I think the trick that they have pulled on us is to leave us in a state of moral relativism where we don't perceive good and evil to be to really exist. Everything is really just sort of shades of gray is where they want us to be, and then they can do their deeds. But when you come to understand that we are in this struggle between good and evil, really, because it's easy to choose a side in that battle, and stand against these forces of darkness that only really have their aim in enslaving us in perpetuity. And with the modern structure surrounded in this globalist mentality, you have the attempt to dissolve human culture, to homogenize it, to make it all blend as one. And really it's the process of removing art from culture, from uniqueness from culture, and to move us more into a hive mind, Borg type of mentality, where we don't have our individualism and everything is about the collective whole. It doesn't take a genius to figure out the 1900s was rife with that attempt to homogenize us with the rise of the Soviet bloc in Russia and the Maoist China revolution, and many others that I could go on about. These attempts were very overt. And again, the focus on America being the beacon for freedom, individuality, and liberty, and how important that is. And there is I'm making this video from Canada, and there's an underlying element, an attempt to demonize the American ethos. And this false history that gives us this division between the native populations, black and white in America, very, very prominent. These are all falsified divisions to keep us pointing our fingers at each other, where we really need to understand the situation here. And of course, they're not going to teach you about the control system they set up in the education system. That'd be ridiculous. But let's get to the theory itself. I believe much of the realm was destroyed in a great cataclysm or series of cataclysms. And remember, this is all speculation, of course. And much of the evidence in what people call the melted buildings, much of the evidence of that cataclysm can be found there, but I think a lot of it was not destroyed, and what you're looking at with much of this architecture are the remains of a previous humanity that once existed on a much higher level of consciousness. I think we were much more harmonious with our surroundings, and that the decorative ornamentation on many of the buildings, what many people call antiquitech, actually served a function, and we were able to utilize the energy of the ether, much like Nikola Tesla had hypothesized, and that this has been obscured from us, has been fictionalized for us as we moved into the era of petroleum and the forces behind that. How the energy of our reality has been controlled by these forces, just like anything else, and monetized, of course. But I believe the railroads, the manufacturing processes, the canals, the bridges, along with the architecture, are remnants of this previous humanity that once existed at a higher level of knowledge and understanding and harmony. I know for a lot of people that sounds very utopian and fictionalized, but I think that is the aim with the education system, is to make us believe so. I believe in many areas there was a digging out or repurposing of many of these structures. That's why we find them as banks and government buildings We have the pipe organs that can be found not just in the churches. You find them in department stores, you find them in universities, you find them in the strangest of places. Also the bells, pipe organs and the bells, I believe were part of this energetic system that we utilized to keep us healthy and harmonious. I believe the knowledge of construction and of building itself was much higher than it is now, and you can see that again in the architecture. And the timelines we are given for many of these structures are far too short to be believable in the narrative that we have been sold. And that should be one of the major triggers for anyone getting into this research, is to understand that there's a deception going on here. I believe through colonialism, through Jesuit orders and secret societies, that a pyramid-like structure was set up where only those at the top knew what was really going on, and the re-education of anyone who existed in these locations had to occur, and that explains many of the asylums. I suspect a lot of the grown-ups with any sort of memory of the old world, or who would not go along with the new world narrative, were institutionalized, and if they had children, that these children were also institutionalized into the orphanages, which were very plentiful in the 1800s, ridiculously so. The fact that there were so many of them, and that this re-education process took time. It took several generations, and it's still taking time because we are still seeing through that deception. Throughout this slideshow, you've seen several examples of what they call the Great Fires and the absolute devastation that occurred. I think there was a massive destruction project going on, although much of it was not destroyed. And you also have very, very short times for many of these buildings to have even existed. Some of them 15 years, some 30 years, where these demolitions go on in the early 1900s. The excuse being dilapidation, many of towers removed. Many buildings have been de-techified, for lack of a better term, where the ornamentation has been removed, and of course they'll always say that's for the safety of the people. But I think again this is all part of that deception to normalize the plain and to obscure that splendor of the old world from our vision. And all we are really left with in many cases are these photographs. And in fact, we are witnessing in real time the destruction of many of these old churches and buildings. It seems to be that the pace is quickening on that for some reason, and it almost feels like it's a desperate attempt to obscure again that history. And the attempt to explain many of these structures through their false timeline, I think, is an oversimplification of what we actually were able to accomplish according to what they tell us and to the means that we had at our disposal. We didn't have much for technology as far as power and hydraulics and all the rest of it goes. But if you're still stuck in their paradigm, you will attribute this type of architecture to just good old-fashioned elbow grease and European skilled hands. I've had many viewers defend their city thinking that I'm trying to insult the location that they grew up in, and that is not the case. What I'm trying to expose is that the history of your location is a falsification. It doesn't take much to figure that out too if you dig a little deeper. It doesn't matter how many blueprints you dig up or how many newspaper clippings you dig up. This is all part of the falsification as far as I can see. And the narrative that they want us to believe does not allow for this architecture to have been constructed, again, like I said, in those timelines by those people. This is going on all over the place, and And I have, again, focused a lot on America, but you can find this magnificent architecture the realm over. Australia has beautiful examples, Canada has wonderful examples, South Africa, and of course Europe. The trolley car, streetcar or rail car, whatever you want to call it, was a large part of the old world transportation system. According to the timeline that we are given, these were originally set up to be pulled by horses, and miraculously electricity was discovered, and many of them were wired up for a short period. But then you get into the 1900s and you get the rapid removal of these systems. You know, growing up, I really only thought several cities had these, places like San Francisco. When you start to do this research, you realize that they were everywhere, and that the width of the streets themselves and the architecture and the placement of all this architecture was all set up with this as a part of the infrastructure. The streets are far too wide for it not to have been a part of the system at its inception. I would also like to mention about the fires that I do not believe that the wanton destruction that many of the fires describe took place in that manner. I think part of it is being used to, again, reset the narrative and to explain to us that many of these structures were built after these fires. Again, it shortens the timeline, but rather many of these structures existed long before the Great Fire of whatever city that may be. And of course, as we lose the connection with the energetics of the previous humanity and system, we have new systems of health and technology, all of them coming through these same forces, I suppose you could say. And it really is exciting to be living in a time where the microscope is on this deception, that we are going to uncover the lies of the health system, the education system, history itself. And like an onion, many of these layers need to be peeled back systematically for many people, because to get to the core of it in an instant would be a very, very destabilizing process. And many of us are at different stages of this awakening process. And I think that is where we are at. We are in a great awakening of humanity, a great revealing of truths. And I suggest that you go through this process, take your breaths while you need them, but really enjoy coming to an understanding that we were and are much more than we have been taught and we have been told, and that we have thought we always were. And never mind the distractions. All of these, professional sports, alcohol, refined sugars, refined foods in general, all of these came about at that same time in the late 1800s, early 1900s. These have all been used to sedate our perception, and there's no shame. There's no regret. We're just going to move forward, and we're going to come to an understanding that we have had the wool pulled over our eyes, and that we are now living in a time of a time to rejoice, a time to undo their deeds and misdeeds of the past, and embrace what we could become again. This has been an old world exploration. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, and comment. I believe we are in the process of remembering who we really are and casting off the shackles of illusion. Until next time.